yakking up, sorry. Yep.
So, for those of you who don't know me, I'm Karen Stoltz, the library director. Thank you all for coming. Next week, a week from today actually, is the Red Sox season opener. So, yes. So we're pleased to have with us author Raymond Sinibaldi, who's going to discuss his new book about the Red Sox home, Fenway Park.
Okay, thanks, Karen. Thanks for coming, folks.
Small limited gathering.
I appreciate. That's okay. Listen, I've had 5, I've had 100. It doesn't matter to me. It's all, you're here because about this, and that's kind of what it's cool about. What I like to do is tell the story of how I ended up here, but this is the cover, the front cover and the back cover. This has probably been the most fun book that I've had, that I've done, and a lot of it has to do with the fact that, and I'll get into the story as I go, but I took a lot of the photographs. And not only did I take a lot of, but there's probably about 90 to 100 photographs in this book that have never been published before. And I also had maybe about 29 different folks who were just fans and photographers, some of them very, very good photographers, worked as professional photographers, but just kind of took this, who gave me permission to print their photographs. So as a result of all of that, we have a lot of them. So the basic, a couple of my favorites here. This little one right here, this is my youngest daughter on her, I think she was 6 years old at the time. And the other ones are on the back. This is Yaz on Yaz Day, tipping of the crowd. I happened to be there and I happened to get that photograph. This is David Ortiz's last regular season game at Fenway on 2017. That was a misty, rainy, holy mackerel. That was a chilly day at Fenway. And this one here was taken, actually it was taken by a friend of mine on the night that Jim Rice's number was retired. And she happened to have seats that were in the first row. She completely lucked out. A friend of hers said, "You want to go?" She went, and 5 seats down from her was Johnny Pesky waiting to unveil the number. But anyway, my particular story actually begins in it begins in prison, to be honest with you, with these 2 knuckleheads. In 1991, I was working at Bridgewater State Hospital. I was in graduate school, and I was working the graveyard shift at Bridgewater State Hospital in the intensive care and isolation unit. And also working in there was a gentleman in the middle. His name is Kerry Keene, who was a lifetime SABR member. And the other guy on the left was a young kid just out of college at the time, and his name is David Hickey. And as life would roll, he's now my son-in-law. I mean, it's kind of funny. But anyway, we used to hang around in prison, and we used to talk about baseball. We found out we were all baseball nuts, loved baseball, and we started talking about Babe Ruth and how great he was before he even got to the Yankees. Well, that led to my first published book was in 1997, The Babe in Red Stockings. That was a chronology of Babe Ruth's every game that Babe Ruth played with the Red Sox. We had a ton of fun. Now, this is the early 90s, mid-90s, and we were at the Boston Public Library cranking through a microfilm, and we literally read, between the 3 of us, we read every account of every game that Babe Ruth played with the Red Sox. And they had 11 newspapers in the city at that time, 11. We used as our sort of our go-to paper, everybody goes to the Boston Globe. We went to the Boston Post, the now defunct Boston Post. And that's kind of what we used. Well, anyway, this was in 1997. It opened up all kinds of doors for us, had a great time. Linda Ruth Tossetti, who was Babe's granddaughter, she wrote the foreword for us. We got to do a book signing at Cooperstown in the Hall of Fame. She was with us, and at that time, I will tell you, it was amazing to me to watch the reaction of kids. And as you could see, she actually looks like her grandfather. And her husband used to say to her, refer to her, he said, "Linda is Babe Ruth in drag." That's what she used to say. She had this round cherubic face, absolutely wonderful woman. But to see the people walking by and looking, and they would see her, and of course they had the big sign, Babe's granddaughter and all that, and they, and just pointing, "That's Babe Ruth." I mean, it was just amazing to me to see the impact still at that time. Well, anyway, I went off to become a school teacher in Florida, and I was working. These guys were still up here. And then around the 2010 or so, David gave us a call and said, he said, "Why don't we do a book on Fenway Park?" He had written an Arcadia book about his hometown of Whitman, Massachusetts. So I said, I'm in. You know, Kerry said, I'm in. So anyway, that led to this. The first book on Fenway Park, which came out in 2012, the 100th anniversary of the year. Those were all black and white. And then I went on my own little journey from there. I was living, as I say, just outside of Sarasota, and I had started my own collection of photographs of old wire photos of spring training in Sarasota and Bradenton. And of course, the Sox were in Sarasota from 1933 to 1958. And so that led to that. And that was pretty cool. They did a little special. The Rays Network did a special on the history of spring training. So I got to chirp on television for a little while. That was pretty fun. I had people calling me saying, what are you doing on my television screen? Then, of course, all of us remember this. If you were breathing on this particular year, this was my wheelhouse. I was at the last game of that season with my dad, got up in the middle of the night, and on that day I began a collection of stuff about 1967 that I finally have stopped. I think it's now just in a box, and I have to stop because there's too much else going on. But anyway, and so I turned that into this. I came across 440 discarded black and white 35 millimeter negative strips of the 1967 season. So I said, okay, and I became a history detective. And that led to the 67 book, which led to the 75 book. And of course, we all remember that. I remember sitting there. I spent a lot of time at Fenway that summer. I was in my early 20s, and nothing else really mattered. And then that was followed up by the following year, 2016. I coach high school baseball in Venice, Florida. I'm an assistant coach. This gentleman is the head coach, Craig Faulkner, who had a 10-year pro career, got up to the AAA level. He played at LSU. And of course, over here is JetBlue Park, if you don't recognize it, which is where we played state championship playoffs for 5 years in a row. And this particular year, we won it. But he had been gathering motivational stories for years. So I worked with him, put that together, and then there was this one, which just came out in April, which I spoke here about when it came out in the spring. I kind of switched gears because I'm a history nut. I'm a history teacher, and I've had an affinity for the Kennedy presidency. Obviously, we all lived here in Massachusetts. It was particularly poignant for us as kids, children of the new frontier, as I like to say, living through that. And that brings me back to the magic of Fenway. Fenway Park is, after the 2012 book, the publishing company, they do a series now called the Modern Images. And Modern Images is they want color photographs. So when they said they wanted one of Fenway, I volunteered for the job. I said, I got it, I'm in. So this was, the front part of the book tells a little bit about the history. It's kind of a condensed history of the Red Sox. These two particular photos, obviously this is a current one. I love this photo. This photo was taken during the 1914 World Series. Well, the 1914 World Series was played at Fenway. The Red Sox did not play in that series, the Boston Braves did. But the interesting thing about the Braves is that year, they moved into Fenway in the first week in September. And of course, they were called the Miracle Braves because they were in last place on July 4th, and they ended up turning it around and winning in first place. And they did it. Their record in September that year was something outrageous once they moved into Fenway. They were like 19-3 or something, and they actually ended up winning the pennant and then actually ended up winning the World Series. I love this because this is a delivery cart that's just dropped off beer or something at the ballpark. But that is obviously Yawkey Way. Then, that's 1914, that's Yawkey Way just last year. And I'm not sure if you understand, you always note the red and the blues, there's always the World Series and the pennant winners, but more on that later. I open up with a picture of the fledgling guys. This is the first ever Red Sox team to win a World Series, 1903. Cy Young in the middle. He looks pretty good. Yeah, he only won 511 games in his career and probably threw 375, 400 innings a year. Now they can't throw 200. I mean, I don't get it, but 200 and you're a workhorse. That's beautiful. But this one over here, I kind of like. This is behind Fenway Park. This is behind the screen, and that's 1912. That's the Royal Rooters. Their first year at Fenway, and they won the World Series.
Cy Young, didn't he lose the most games of any pitcher?
He may very well have. He's up over 300. I think it's, yeah.
The most, but he also lost.
Lost the most, yeah. Well, those guys, Old Hoss Radbone in 1886 won 66 games for the Providence Grays, 66 and 10, and he threw 686 innings.
Probably not throwing, I don't know.
No, they weren't. Every team had one pitcher, or maybe two. No, Old Hoss Radbone. I love him. I love the name. It's beautiful. Well, as I went through it, I actually changed the first chapter, and I started to do kind of a then and now thing. And I really like this because there were two photographs. This is taken in 1912. You can see the workmen that are kind of working on the original left field wall. Well, the original left field wall was a 25-foot high wooden fence. And you can't really see it here, but it went up on a cliff. It elevated. And the Red Sox left fielder was a guy by the name of Duffy Lewis. And it became known as Duffy's Cliff because he was so adept at playing it, running that ball up the hill. Well, when I found those photographs, and this is actually what made me change, I went to the BC Notre Dame game, football game, and whenever that was, 2015, I think. And it turns out that when I'm looking at this photograph, I said, I remember this is taken from the same proximity where I was sitting during the football game. I was behind the bullpen in right field, and obviously they had you can see. So basically, this is the left field corner in 1912, and then this is the left field corner in about 2015, about 103 years later. And that's obviously during the national anthem, and that was a crazy game. High school football, when Tom Yawkey bought the team in the 1930s, the most sport played at Fenway Park other than baseball was football, and specifically high school football. There had been, up to the 1930s, first 20 years, there were well over 200 football games that were played at Fenway Park. That tradition lay dormant after the 30s and was resumed in 2015 when Needham played Wellesley. It's the oldest, here you go, there was 49 games in 1934. Okay, in 1935, the last one to be played was South Boston High School beating Brighton High School 14-0. And then it wasn't until 2015 when Needham beat Wellesley 12-7. And sometimes blind squirrels catch nuts. And I just happened to be standing in the end zone, standing by the side, and I had my camera, and I ended up snapping that shot, which was perfect. So it worked out very well. But high school football was, in fact, a staple in the early days of Fenway Park. And then I kind of went back and forth with this. You guys familiar with the stat of WAR? They call it WAR, W-A-R. It's kind of a new it's new, well, relatively new, sabermetric, but it means wins above replacement. And and basically what it means is it measures how well the team did with that particular player in the lineup, as opposed to if a replacement player, somebody else had been in the lineup that was not him. It's very complex, and I don't really understand how they do it all. But it has become a very, very measurable stat. It's used, a lot of guys are using it now in consideration for MVP votes. They're using it now in contract negotiations and things like that. But just to give you an idea of how it worked, if you have a 5 or a 6 WAR, you are an all-star. That's an all-star caliber player. You start getting up in a 7 and an 8 for a WAR in a season, now you're talking MVP stuff. Pitchers have a tendency to have higher ones because their replacements, there's a 4-man pitching staff, so their replacements, they're limited, but everyday players will not quite get as high. That having been said, you can see this was a great thing to me. From 1912, Smokey Joe Wood was the man. At that time, he went 34-5. These are his stats. His WAR was 11.7. And Pedro Martinez in 1999, he went 18-6. In 99, he was 23-4, 313 Ks. And that year, Pedro Martinez became the first pitcher in history to strike out 300 batters in a season and walk less than 50 in the same season. She was the first one to hit the 300. It's only been done 3 other times since. Curt Schilling did it with the Diamondbacks. Clayton Kershaw has done it with the Dodgers. And Chris Sale just did it with the Red Sox last year. He had 308 strikeouts and 43 walks. So these were comparable. So obviously, we're talking almost 100 years apart here. Now, Tris Speaker was the man in 1912. And of course, David Ortiz in 2013 in the World Series was one of the most ridiculous offensive performances I've ever seen. It was just remarkable. So these are those, he's kind of like the 2 guys, and I'm sure that it's not going to be long before Ortiz follows Tris Speaker into the Hall of Fame. Excuse me. You see his WAR of 10.1, okay? There has only been 5 players in Red Sox history, offensive players, who have had a WAR that's hit double digits. Tris Speaker, Ted Williams, Babe Ruth, and some guy named Yastrzemski. Excuse me, I take that back. Babe Ruth didn't do it because he was pitching too. Carl Yastrzemski and Rico Petrocelli, believe it or not, in 1969. I met Rico recently at a golf tournament, and we were kind of chatting about this stuff, and he said, I don't really get all that stuff. I said, well, let me tell you this. If it were today and you had the 1969 season, you probably would have been the MVP. And he kind of perked up. He said, really? I said, yeah. I said, I'm just telling you. He said, dang. He would have got a raise, he thought, but that's... This is the 100th anniversary. Babe Ruth, of course, joined the Red Sox on July 11th, 1914, and on July 11th, 2014, the Red Sox had, this is Babe's granddaughter, Linda Ruth Tassetti, her husband Andy, and they she threw out the first pitch. It is remarkable to me that when we look at his numbers, and they talked about Barry Bonds a few years back when he was cheating his way to outrageous numbers. And I always said, well, Barry Bonds took steroids so that he could be Babe Ruth on beer and hot dogs, basically. It's a remarkable player, just remarkable. I still say he's probably the greatest player of all time. My son and I fight about it all the time. 1918, of course, the season is cut short in 1918 because of World War I. It ends on early in September, and it's the last time that the Red Sox win a World Series for a lot of years. 2017, okay, they were the American League. They were the AL East champs. That's as far as it went. More on that later. But as we all know, the banners that's outside, Fenway Park has really become a museum, and this is all part of it, that they alternate these. And these are all players who played some significant years with the Red Sox who ended up going into the Hall of Fame. They may not necessarily be in the Hall of Fame as a Red Sox player, but they, obviously Babe Ruth is in with his Yankee cap on and his bronze plaque at Cooperstown, but he certainly was a significant player, as was Lefty Grove. Anyway. This is, and of course, that was the beginning of, they called it the curse. 1933, Tom Yawkey buys the team. This is him with Eddie Collins and Buck Harris, the manager, taking on the right field roof at Fenway Park. Loved the fedoras. And then when Yawkey took over, the Red Sox had suffered probably the most abysmal stretch in their history. They had finished in last place, I don't even know, 10 years. They had years where they lost 100 games 3 years in a row. I mean, it was just terrible. In the mid-20s, the famous fire at Fenway Park burned the left field grandstands, and they didn't even fix it. Bob Quinn didn't even fix it. He just said, forget it, nobody's coming anyway. So they just roped it off, and there was the charred grandstands just sitting there. Well, Tom Yawkey, who was a Detroit native, grew up in Detroit, was basically adopted by his uncle, and his uncle had passed away. His uncle had been a part owner of the Detroit Tigers at one time, and he left Yawkey a boat full of money. However, Yawkey could not spend it till he was 30 years of age. He couldn't touch it. So at the age of 30, he bought the Red Sox, and he began a heavy-duty renovation. 1933, they locked into Sarasota for spring training. He started rebuilding Fenway Park. And the other thing he started to do was he started to acquire players. He used his money. Using mostly money, he acquires Jimmy Fox. And this is Jimmy Fox and Bobby Doerr. The patch tells you it's 1939, the 100th anniversary of baseball. But first he got Lefty Grove, who was the best pitcher in the league at the time. Jimmy Fox, who was a Triple Crown winner, had been an MVP with both of them with the Philadelphia Athletics. He acquires Ferrell, and all of these guys, Doerr and Pesky, were regular Red Sox up through the farm system kind of guys. Doerr arrives in 38. Pesky got there in 42. And this was kind of an interesting, I had some fun with this. This is 1934, on April 21st, 1934. The wall's brand new, and you got the speakers out there at the top. This is the fifth game that was played when the wall was up. And then I came across a photograph of a very similar play with the scoreboard in place out of Fenway. That's April 14th, 2012. So I had some fun trying to kind of match up. I mean, this is a play that we've seen probably thousands of times at Fenway Park. And that first baseman there was Carlos Pena, by the way, who kind of spent a little bit of time with us, but played his college ball at Northeastern. Of course, in 1939, this guy showed up. I love these two photographs. First, there's not very many color photographs of him in 1939. That's his rookie year. But I absolutely love this photo. And I love it for a number of reasons. You can see these two guys, giants in the game. This photograph was taken Memorial Day weekend in 1939. Lou Gehrig's streak is over. And in fact, Lou Gehrig, at this photograph was taken, is less than 2 weeks away from receiving his diagnosis from the Mayo Clinic that he has amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, which obviously would become his disease. DiMaggio arrived in 36, and by 1939, he is probably widely recognized as the best player in the game. And over here, so this is May now, so we're 8 weeks into his first big league season, and here's this skinny old kid who's just kind of rather unassumedly just kind of sitting there, pawing the dirt with his cleats, and that is none other than Ted Williams. Now, it's interesting to note that, we talk about the Red Sox-Yankees rivalry. Okay, the Red Sox-Yankees rivalry really began, and a lot of people talk going back to the curse and back to Babe Ruth and back to there was no rivalry after Babe Ruth went from the Red Sox to the Yankees, because the Red Sox stunk. They were awful. You can't have a rivalry when one team just continually pounds the other team. And their records in the time that Babe Ruth played with the Yankees and then the Red Sox, so from 1920 to 1932, the Red Sox and Yankees records were almost identically reversed in terms of wins and losses. It was absurd. So there really was no rivalry. When the rivalry began, it began as a personal rivalry between Joe DiMaggio and Ted Williams.
Is that picture of Ted, is that backwards?
Which one?
I'm having trouble looking.
This one here?
Yeah.
No.
Because he left-handed.
He's completed his swing.
Oh, it's all right.
Yeah, he's already swung through the baseball. Yeah. And it's amazing how skinny he is. You know what I mean? I mean, he really was in the beginning, he was a very, very wiry kid. And it's kind of interesting, and I'll get to that later as I tell you the story of the Ted Williams statue. So this is 1939, and of course we're on the verge. There's war going on in Europe, but in 1941, we had a number of things. You had Ted hit 406, you had Joe D hitting 56 consecutive games, and then of course we're in December, World War II begins. Just an interesting note that year, that actually during Joe DiMaggio's 56-game hitting streak, Ted Williams out-hit him. And batting average was higher. Ted's batting average was higher during that week. So then, of course, this is Ted's arrival also led to the fact that the bullpens were built out in right field. They had never been out there. They always were just wide, that the park was cavernous out there. And when Williams arrived, Yawkey said, we got to help him a little bit. So they built the bullpens and they shortened the home run porch by about 20, 25 feet. And actually, when they initially built it, they called it Williamsburg. Because that's why, in fact, they had done it. And then the talk started. Well, imagine DiMaggio playing at Fenway, short left field fence, Ted Williams in Yankee Stadium, and all of that. And actually, a trade almost came off in 1948, and it's a good thing that they sobered up, that Yawkey sobered up by the time we get back to Boston. 1942, Ted Williams wins his first Triple Crown. Okay, but Joe Gordon was the MVP. And just to kind of throw it out there, okay, Yankees win, so that's always was taken into consideration. But those, I just throw the numbers up there to see, and even using the stat of WAR, Gordon's was 8.2, and Ted had he had one that was over 10 in double digits. And again, he won the Triple Crown. That doesn't happen a whole lot. He won 2 of them. He wasn't MVP either year, which is a little bit crazy to me. Yeah, and he was a cantankerous sort of guy. He didn't mince a lot of words. Ted didn't. This was, again, kind of like a then and now kind of thing. This was taken by a friend of mine. I was at Fenway in November of 2013. They allowed us to, my brother and I, 5 of us have had season tickets for a while. Well, in 2013, they said that season ticket holders could come and take batting practice at Fenway. So my brother called me. He said, do you want to do this? And I said, what, are you kidding me? I said, you going to do it? He said, no, I don't want to do it. I said, I'm coming. So I literally got on a plane and flew up, and it was November, and I will tell you, it was about 20 degrees. So I was laying up with all kinds of gear, and I went out there, and I went 1 for 10, I think. But I actually had a little number that I got down the line. It just fell inside the line. I said, with my speed, I probably would have got a double. But anyway, they left this on the scoreboard. Okay, that was the clincher against the Cardinals, Game 6 of the 2013 World Series. And then I came across this, and this was Game 4 of the 1946 World Series, where the Sox had got shellacked, and Ted was just resting, leaning on the wall as they replaced with yet another pitcher. And of course, 20 hits that day. Yeah, imagine that. And just for the heck of it, they tacked on 4 runs in the top of the ninth. But what was interesting about this, of course, is the story of Pesky and Eno's Country Slaughter and the Mad Dash and all of this stuff. Well, when I did the book signing in 1997, next to us was Eno's Slaughter, and it was really pretty funny. And he was a nice old chap, and he was selling the photographs that he was signing was him sliding into home plate. So my son at the time was like 12. So he says, Dad, do you think Papa would mind if I got Eno Slaughter's autograph on this? I said, I think I'll be all right with that. But it was so funny. But he knew. I said to him, as I'm sure you're aware, I said, you're a big part of Red Sox folklore. And he said, whatever the heck the date was, October 12th, 1946, 4:31 p.m. I mean, it's funny. I thought to myself, talk about being defined by a moment. And he knew what his moment was. It was pretty cool. He was and of course, that was all became part of the curse stuff. This was pretty interesting. Of course, at Fenway now, I don't know if you've seen this, if you go down the right field line, it's one of the things I liked about doing this book is I actually went into Fenway 2 different games and didn't really watch a whole lot of the game, but I literally walked around every area that I could just to see the kinds of displays that they had. This was one of my favorites. It's sort of an in-glass display. This happens to be the Ted Williams, that's his bomber jacket from when he was in Korea. And it's kind of neat to see this display for the greatest generation. The Red Sox had 15 players that went in to World War II. Excuse me, 400 of them went throughout around 400 of them went throughout. And I also came across another photo for years, and you may have seen this photo. There's always a very famous photo of Congressman John F. Kennedy in the dugout with a bat, and he's between Ted Williams, Hank Greenberg, and Eddie Pellegrini, who was a Red Sox shortstop at the time. For many, many, many years, it was thought that that was the only photograph ever taken of John F. Kennedy at Fenway Park. But it's not. This guy's name was Charles McGilvery. As you can see, he lost his arm, and this was taken in 1947. And the story of him losing his arm is remarkable. He lost it at the Battle of the Bulge. He was wounded at the Battle of the Bulge. Battle of the Bulge was particularly cold out there, and he took the stump of his arm and he stuck it in the snow. And the frozen clump stopped the bleeding, and that's how he ended up only losing his arm and not losing his life. So I thought that was pretty cool, and I always took the time to say, this guy's pretty interesting guy. He was a left-handed pitcher for the Red Sox. He won Game 1 of the 1946 World Series in relief. He was part of the D-Day invasion force. He played seven seasons with the Sox. He also fought at the Battle of the Bulge, and he received the bronze, both the bronze and the silver star. So Earl Johnson, he's not a very well-known Red Sox player, but I kind of enjoyed researching the guys who had fought in World War II. 1948 came the first playoff game. We remember the 1978 playoff game, 30 years earlier. And this was one of the stories that I remembered my dad telling me about how the Red Sox would find inexplicable ways to lose pennants, games, big series. And this was one of them. Mel Parnell was a kid pitcher at the time, good left-handed pitcher. He had been 8-3 that year. He was actually 2-1 against the Cleveland Indians with an earned run average of 1.73 in his 3 starts against the Indians. But he was left-handed. So, of course, the adage was lefties can't pitch at Fenway. And jumping Joe McCarthy, who was a Red Sox manager who had managed the Yankees to 7, 8, 9 World Series championships, he crossed over. He came off from the Evil Empire, and he came to the Red Sox. Of course, he didn't know that at the time that he was with the Evil Empire. But anyway, he chose Denny Galehouse. And Denny Galehouse was a kind of a journeyman right-handed pitcher because he thought he went with the veteran, and the rest, as they say, is history. Denny Galehouse pitched 3 innings, gave up 4 runs, and the Red Sox went down to defeat in the 1-game playoff. And the Indians, I think it's the last time they won the World Series, if I remember correctly. But this is the guy who made the decision, Joe McCarthy, 16 seasons with the Yankees. Oh, he only won 7 World Series. Played in 8, was 7-1. In 1949, he was also managing the Red Sox. In 1949, the last weekend, they lose to the Yankees. They go in and they lose. They have to win 1 out of 2, and they lose both, and they lose it. They lose it by a game. They're on Saturday, they blow a 4-0 lead, lose 5-4. When the immortal Johnny Lindell homered in the 8th inning. He had 72 career homers, and that was a big one. And then on Sunday, they were down 1-0 into the 8th. Parnell comes in to pitch. He gives up 4 runs. They go down 5-0. They get 3 in the 9th, and they lose 5-3. I remember my dad telling me these stories and his frustration. Again, and this all would become part of Dan Shaughnessy's book, The Curse of the Bambino, which, I mean, he really invented the curse. Dan Shaughnessy's the guy who invented the curse. And ironically, when I was coming up on the plane on Tuesday night, he sat 2 seats in front of me. We didn't chat, though. Now, 1950 is kind of another, and this is really the Red Sox-Yankees rivalry. This is really the birth of a rivalry because they're competing for first place. And this is going on in head-to-head stuff. But 1950, this was a remarkable season. They're tied for first on the 18th of May, 9.5 out on the 18th of June, 9.5 out on July 18th, 6 out. They're closing, 1 out on September 18th, lose 4 straight, 7 out of 11, finish third, 4 games out. And now, so they kind of made a run, of course. Guys who were on top were the Yankees. The Yankees now in 1950, 49 they won. 1950 they now were in the midst of winning 5 consecutive World Series, which they did twice. Billy Goodman was the batting champ. Walt Dropo was the first ever Red Sox player to be Rookie of the Year. This is right around your wheel by the time you were there. You were going to the game. So it was really from 46 to 50 when the Red Sox-Yankees rivalry begins. And even in 40, '48, when the Red Sox battled the Yankees to the last day, the Indians on the playoff game, the Yankees were in that mix right to the end, to the last weekend of the season. So that's really when the rivalry begins. But what happens in the 50s is kind of a little bit like there's no rivalry, because the Red Sox become very mediocre in the 1950s, while the Yankees are winning. From 1950 to 1960, there was a team from New York in every World Series, except for the Yankees were a big chunk of that. But you could see it all there. The rivalry kind of took a little nap. 1958 was probably their best year, and they finished in third place, but they were 13 games out. Jackie Jensen won the MVP that year, though. And of course, Ted was in Korea from 52 to 53. As I said, Jackie Jensen was the 1958 MVP. And Jackie Jensen was a brilliant baseball player who actually was originally with the Yankees, and then he went to the Senators, and from the Senators he came to the Red Sox. Lost him to an unbelievable fear of flying. And once they started flying all over the place, Jensen he tried it, he quit for a year, he came back, but he couldn't do it. He couldn't do it. So now, he could play.
Did he play in a Rose Bowl?
He did. Absolutely. I think he still is the only guy to win a Rose Bowl and win a World Series. So he did with the Yankees.
He quit 1 year,
Then he came back. Yeah.
But he died young.
He did die young. He died very shortly after. I saw him at an old timers game in like 1982, and before that summer ended, he had died of a heart attack. Yeah.
My husband told me Jackie had taken the big bump to the sky.
Yep.
The way he told me
He did.
died.
There you go. Well, now we're in 1959. Of course, Jackie Robinson came in 1947, and the Red Sox became the last team to integrate in 1959. So now it was time to the changing of the culture, if you will. And this is. I really like this photograph. This photograph was taken on the night, I think it's August 4th, 1959. You got Frank Malzone, third base, Don Budden at shortstop. My father used to call him Don E6. Pumpsy Green was at second, and Pete Reynolds was the first baseman. This marked the first time that a black man started in a game at Fenway Park wearing a Red Sox uniform. He led off the game with a triple and scored. So that was 1950. That was June. That was August of '59. He had been called up in July while the Red Sox were in Chicago, and a week later, this guy got called up. Now, Earl Wilson had been signed long before Pumpsy Green had been signed. Wilson was signed in 1953, and he was actually playing in the minor leagues. And interestingly enough, Earl Wilson played in Montgomery, Alabama, the Red Sox minor league team, in 1955 during the Montgomery bus boycott. Of course, this is him with Bill Monbouquet, and that was 1962 when they threw no-hitters 6 weeks apart. Wilson's was in June, the end of June, June 26th, and on August 1st in Chicago. Earl Wilson's was at Fenway. Anybody there? Was anybody there? My brother was at that game. I remember watching it on TV.
Wilson was supposed to be called up first, but didn't the Army draft him?
Right.
Something happened. He
didn't. He was up with.
The first one coming
6 days later, they called him up. Well, Pumpsy Green had an unbelievable spring in 1959. Now, I know there's a lot of talk about Tom Yawkey and racism. And I'll tell you something, nothing sickens me more than to hear this. And to hear John Henry talk about changing the name because he's haunted by his racist past. I don't really understand it because Yawkey was not a racist. Now, there were guys under him that were, but Yawkey, you know, I was glad to see Reggie Smith spoke out the other day and said that, he spoke out in favor of keeping it as Yawkey Way. But anyway, and any black player you talked to throughout the 60s and the 70s, they had nothing but great things to say about as they called him, Mr. Yawkey. But anyway, Wilson would go on to, in 1967, win 22 games for the Tigers, as a matter of fact. So now you have a lot of things going on as they start signing some young kids. George Scott, the boomer, in 1962, he gets signed out of Greenville, Mississippi. This is all the work of a guy named Dick O'Connell. Mike Higgins, who was a virulent racist, and basically was always often heard saying, there will never be a nigger playing on this team as long as I'm the manager. Well, they fired Higgins, and Billy Jurgis was the manager, brought up Pumpsie Green about 2 weeks later. So now Dick O'Connell is the general manager, and he signed Boomer, and you can see his contribution. He becomes the first black American of the Red Sox to play in an All-Star game. And this guy could hit. I mean, he could flat out hit. And I'm not sure that anybody in the history of baseball ever had more fun in a baseball field than this kid did. Absolutely loved the game. 1967, he had a pretty good year. He was one of the cardiac kids, winning a Gold Glove at first base. He would leave the Red Sox, and then he would come back. Yes.
I've got a game when he split his pants.
When he what?
Split the back of his pants.
Well, that might have been when he was bulking up a little bit. He got a little chunk. Well, Dick Williams used to, he called him cement head and all that. Yeah, he kind of. And of course, 1967, the Cardiac Kids. This team was remarkable, led by these two guys primarily, okay, Yastrzemski and Lomborg. Pretty remarkable story. I'll tell you a quick story about Jim Lomborg in 1967. When he pitched that last game of the season, there was a young high school girl named Rosie who was visiting the city, knowing nothing about the Red Sox, nothing about baseball, and nothing about anybody named Jim Lomborg. And the delirium that was in the city after the Red Sox won the pennant, she kind of said, "This is the happiest place in the world. Everybody's happy. This is great." She was like visiting a college, staying on the outskirts of the city. She said, "This has got to be the happiest place in America." And she decided to go to school there. And 4 years later, she met Jim Lomborg. And as he says, the rest is history. He said 6 kids and 8 grandkids later, they've been in Situate, and of course he's got the practice in Hanover that I think he's just retired from. I heard that he's just, yeah. But anyway, here was the lineup. And this is most of the starters on this team. I kind of like this. I found this. It was a slide that I found that I was delighted with because this is the first game of the 1967 World Series. And the reason that I really am excited about it is because somewhere up there is me. I was with my dad. We got standing room tickets. We got up at ungodly hour. We were the 5th people in line, and we got there. But anyway, all of these guys, the average age of this starting lineup was 23 3/4 years of age. The Red Sox had not had a younger team, a team that young since the days of Babe Ruth, go back to 1915, 1916, and they have never fielded a younger team since. So you think about that, these kids were 23 years old when they did what they did in 1967. And the guy, of course, who led them was this guy, who himself was only 36 years old. And I remember when they hired him, he actually finished his career with the Red Sox. In 1964, he was a utility man playing for the Red Sox. And then he retired, and they hired him and they put him in Toronto. So he managed a AAA team in Toronto, 65 and 66. And a lot of the guys on that 67 team he had actually managed in Toronto. And he said that very famous quote with the newsmen there. He said, "They won't quit." He said, basically, he said, "No, they didn't quit on me at Toronto, and I don't intend anybody to quit on me here." First thing he did is he took the captaincy away from Yaz, which made Yaz very happy. He said, "There's only one captain here, that's me." And that made Yaz very happy. And he said, "I honestly think we'll win more than we lose." And obviously, the rest is history. One of the key players in that year was this guy, Tony Conigliaro. And everybody knows the story of Tony C. I mean, that was and actually Ted Williams plays a little part in that story. 2 days before, Tony C's agent was down in Lakeville, not too far from here, where Ted had his camp with the kids. And Tony C's agent was down there visiting him, and when he left, he had actually said to him, he said, "Be careful." He said, "Tell Tony to back a little bit off the plate." He said, "I think he's just trying to get too much to the plate. They're going to come after him. They're going to get him." And 2 nights later, Jack Hamilton hit him in the face. The story is well known, well chronicled, and I actually do believe that if William Shakespeare came out of the grave and kind of walked around and went to a baseball game and said, "I kind of like this game. I'd like to write about it. Give me a guy, give me a tragic hero," that this would be the guy he'd pick. I mean, there's no doubt. He should have been dead at 45 when he should have really been wrapping up a Hall of Fame career as a designated hitter. The youngest guy in the American League to hit 100 career home runs. The youngest guy ever to win a home run championship in 1965. And he was a pretty clutch guy. Also the guy on that team, we mentioned him earlier, Rico. Only him and Yaz played in the 67 and 75 World Series. But if you want to win a trivia question, you could ask this question. How many guys on the from the 1967 team were in the opening day lineup in 1975? Because the answer is actually 3, because Canigliaro came back in 1975, won the DH job, and he was a designated hitter in opening day 1975. He was gone by May, but he was just too old. So now you have, this is just, again, the war, the 10.0 war. Here you go. He's in pretty good company. Rico's in company with the top 4. He liked the fact that I mentioned him with Tris Speaker, Ted Williams, and Yaz. Then in 1972, this kid arrived. And now we're going to see the beginning of the Red Sox-Yankee rivalry. When the Red Sox got good in '67, the Yankees were terrible. In 1966, the Red Sox finished in 9th place. The Yankees finished in 10th. They were half a game ahead of the Yankees. So that really was no rivalry. 1970, Thurman Munson was the Rookie of the Year for the Yankees. And this is really where the rivalry began, because these two guys really didn't like each other. And they were two of the best catchers in the American League. Very similar ball players, hard-nosed, crusty guys, no-nonsense kind of players. And actually, this I love this, because this created a Donnybrook when they used to really fight and not just kind of, go out there and push. They used to fight. It was, and actually, Fisk in 1972 created a little bit of controversy when he called out both Yaz and Reggie Smith, and he said, we really need some leadership. We're not getting leadership from guys in a Sports Illustrated article. He was a rookie. He was a kid. And he also was a guy, obviously, who walked the walk. 1975, so in 72, the Red Sox actually finish in 2nd place in the American League East. It's the first year of the strike. They resume play, and they decide they will do nothing about the uneven games that the guys would play. They said, it can't be that big of a deal. Well, the Red Sox went into Tiger Stadium that last weekend of the season, and again, you talk about the curse. So they end up losing 2 out of 3 to the Tigers, and they finish with the same amount of losses, but the Tigers had 1 more win just because they played 1 more game. So it was only the 2nd time in history that a team actually did not finish first and lost by only a half game. So that was, and again, would become part of the curse folklore many years later. 1975, these two guys were the best rookies in the history of the game, offensively. Both of them with over 100 RBIs, both of them with 20-plus homers. Both of them hit over 300. Freddie Lynn became the first guy first player to win the MVP and Rookie of the Year in the same season. Ichiro would do it, would be the other guy to do it. And of course, Jim Rice would go on to the Hall of Fame. After the 1975 season, if you had to pick a Hall of Famer, you probably would have picked Lynn. Freddie Lynn said worst thing he ever did was leave Fenway Park. He was tailor-made for that park, the way his inside-out swing, he could have had 50 doubles a year for God knows how many years. But not bad. He had 300-plus career homers. He did it. And Rice, of course, made it into Cooperstown in his last eligible year of voting, which was in 2009. And then this guy arrived on the scene and changed the game forever at Fenway Park. Made his debut in 1964. First game he ever pitched in the big leagues was at Yankee Stadium. He was pitching for the Indians against the Yankees. He struck out 11 guys and shut them out in his first major league game. His story is well chronicled. If you have not seen it, I recommend you watch it's called The Lost Son of Havana, and it's a story of Louis going back to Havana maybe about 6 or 7 years ago. It's an ESPN, well worth looking up. It's a remarkable story. But he had, in 1968, if Denny McClain had not won 31 games for the Tigers, he would have won the Cy Young Award. No question about it. His ERA This was the year that Gibson threw a 1.12 ERA, and after 68, they lowered the mound from 15 inches to 10 inches. But like I said, without Denny McLain, he's the most dominant pitcher in the game. He arrives in 1971. He hurt his arm. He gets cut by the Twins. The Twins let him loose. And the Indians had traded him to the Twins. The Twins cut him loose. They thought he was done because he had hurt his arm. He goes to the Atlanta Braves. And Darrell Johnson is managing the Louisville, the Red Sox team, AAA team in Louisville. And he sees him pitch, and he says, I think he's got something left. They bring him up in 71. He kind of gets knocked around the second half of the year. But in 1972, he again has the 1.91 ERA. Comes up about June of 72, and he's lights out. And again, the rest is history. His resume, it speaks for itself. I am astounded that this guy is not in the Hall of Fame. He missed again last year. He was in the whatever the heck they call him now. They change all the names. He used to call it the Veterans Committee. 1975, he shut out the Reds in the first game of that World Series, beat them in Game 4 in a ridiculous, he threw 169 pitches and beat them 5-4. 1975 Babe Ruth Award. That's the New York Sports Writers Award that they give for who they think is the most valuable player in the World Series. So the New York Sports Writer thought he was the MVP of the World Series, despite the fact that the Red Sox had lost that World Series. His last game in a Red Sox uniform, 1978. The Red Sox said, we all know about the collapse. The Red Sox were up in July. The biggest lead they ever had in the season was 10.5 games over the Milwaukee Brewers in second place, but at that time they were 14 games ahead of the Yankees. They come in the Yankees come in September for a 4-game set, and they sweep them. And they beat them, they call it the Boston Massacre, and they beat them like a drum. I mean, there wasn't even one game that was close. So the Red Sox, now they're tied by a week later. The Red Sox are playing in Yankee Stadium on a Sunday, and they're 3.5 games back, and they're about to just go over the abyss. They rally, they win the game, they cut it to 2.5, and then they go on an unbelievable winning streak where they win the last, I forget, 8 games in a row, whatever it may be. And the Yankees, in the last game, the Yankees are ahead by a game. The Red Sox have already run the coin toss. So if they tie, they're going to play that game at Fenway Park. Louis goes out and throws a 2-hit shutout against the Blue Jays, and Rick Waits beat the Yankees, and they were all playing at Fenway the next day, which was more lunacy. We'll get to that in a minute. I love this 1975. This is when Yaz kind of emerged as he became, I guess, elevated to sainthood. 1975, I guess. And I'll tell you a funny story. And this is why. Vern Rule. And in September 21st, Jim Rice was obviously playing a lot of left field. Yaz was playing mostly first base and DHing. Rice had replaced him in left field. And Vern Rule hits Rice in the wrist with a fastball, breaks his wrist. So Rice is now out. I met Vern Rule. I was doing a promotional thing with our baseball team. We were doing a home run derby in Sarasota, and Vern Rule was the pitching coach of the Cincinnati Reds team in Sarasota. So they wanted to be represented, so they sent Vern Rule down. So he comes up to our press box and he said, I'm Vern Rule. And he said, I'm here, I'm looking for Ray Sinibaldi. And I looked at him, I said, you're Vern Rule? He said, yeah. I said, and I looked at him, I said, you son of a bitch. And he looked at me, he started laughing, he goes, Red Sox fan, right? I said, yep. So anyway, yeah, he remembered that he broke Jim Rice's wrist with a week to go. But anyway, Yaz went to left field. And the American League Championship Series, he did this. He had 455, a home run, knocked in a couple of runs, scored 4 runs. And the 4th inning, they're down 3-0. He hit a 2-run homer, basically started going. He basically was 1967 all over again, only now he was 36 years old. He wasn't 27, he was 36. He threw out Reggie Smith in a key part of the Game 3. This was in Oakland. He had thrown him out. He cut off a ball in the gap that Reggie Jackson had hit. He gunned him out. And as he's running by him, Jackson's just lying there at second base, and he just looks up at him. and he's just glaring at him. And Yaz went by him. He said he never even broke stride. All he said to him was, "Reggie, you should know better than that." He just kept going. And and Reggie told that story. It's great. It's great stuff. So this really kind of elevated him to, he was on his way to sainthood at this point in time. 75 World Series. Well, there you go. There's two of the biggest moments. And this is Bernie Cabo crossing home plate after he hits the home run. One of the most amazing at-bats I ever witnessed. My brother and I had season tickets then. I was of the ripe old age of 22 at the time. So we were at 3 of the games. I went to 3 of those games. Game 6, this was crazy time. And I've always said this, as great as Carlton Fisk's home run was to win the game, this was absolutely electrifying because you really had resigned yourself to the fact that they were going to lose. And it was the 8th inning. They were down 6-3, and it was the Big Red Machine. They weren't supposed to beat them. And I can remember clearly and distinctly just sitting as the 8th inning rolls around, and I just said to my brother, "Hey, what are you going to do?" They just didn't have the horses. They just weren't good enough. And then, Rico gets on, then Dwight Evans gets on. Cabo steps out of the dugout to pinch hit with 2 strikes on him, takes the worst swing you'd ever want to see, takes the ball literally out of Johnny Bench's glove, and the foul ball stays alive, and then the next ball he drills into the center field bleachers. It went bonkers. So that was kind of the elevation, and you really expected the Red Sox were going to win that game. After that happened, it was just a matter of when and how. And then, of course, you had the 9th inning where Lynn hits the fly ball and the run gets thrown out, and Denny Doyle gets thrown out at home plate. So they should have won in the 9th inning. In the 11th inning, the Reds, Joe Morgan almost hits a 3-run homer that Dwight Evans goes in and pulls out. They throw the guy out at first base, and that ends that. And then in the 12th inning, Fisk is standing with leading off the inning. Freddie Lynn's on deck, and Fisk looks at him and says, I'm gonna double off the wall, drive me in. Freddie says, "I'm on board, I'm with that." And of course, he didn't quite double. Instead, he homered off the foul pole. So, and the rest is, and that is, you may or may not know this, but Major League Baseball Network about 5 years ago, they did the 50 greatest televised games in the history of baseball. And this one came out number 1. It was pretty, and actually until 2004, this really was the signature moment. Fisk's home run was the signature moment of the Red Sox franchise, from 1918 probably for the whole century, really. And then came 1978. And I love these 2 pictures, okay? And I love these 2 pictures for 2 reasons. And the one on the left, that's Carl Yastrzemski. Carl Yastrzemski was 39 years old. So now it's 1 game. We're back to, it's only the 2nd time he's had a 1-game playoff in the history of the American League. So this is for the American League East. The Red Sox, they go in. Both teams go in with a record of 99 wins and 62 losses, okay? Now, the Red Sox haven't won 100 games since 1946, and they still haven't won 100 games since 1946. But they go into this game in 99, and it's the 2nd inning. Now, Ron Guidry, left-handed fireball guy, was outrageous that year. He was as good as 25-3. He was as good as Sandy Koufax that year. And he had a blazing fastball. So 39-year-old Grandpa Yaz steps in, and this is actually the photograph. And he hits a home run about 20 rows deep into the right field bleachers, giving the Red Sox a 1-0 lead. I mean, it was unbelievable that a left-handed hitter, 39 years old, was going to take a Ron Guidry fastball in 1978 and hit a home run. It was one of the most impressive things I've ever seen at Fenway Park. And I was sitting right down in here that time. Oh, right there. But anyway, my woman who would become my future wife was in the right field grandstands. And if you look at this, it doesn't really look like much because it's just a picture of a scoreboard. But when you look at the scoreboard very closely, you will see that it's the 7th inning. There's 2 outs. Okay, the Red Sox are leading 2-0. There's a 1-ball, 1-strike count on the batter, who happens to be a guy by the name of Bucky Dent. Okay, there were 2 guys on base, and if you may or may not remember, Bucky Dent fouled the ball off of his foot, and he was limping around and limping around and limping around. He was trying to shake it off, and during this time, because you can see the arrow points to Bucky Dent at shortstop, and So she takes out her camera and says, oh, this is a good picture. So she takes a picture of the scoreboard. Well, after Bucky Dent walks around and limps around and limps around, he gets back in the batter's box, and the next pitch, he hits literally a fly ball, a very normal fly ball to left field. And when it left the bat, everybody's thinking, beautiful, they're going to get out of it, because the Yankees had 2 guys on. Top half of the 7th inning. And Yaz went back, and he went back, and he went back, and you can see it, and he's just watching it, and he turned to take it off the wall, because he thought it was going to hit the wall, and the ball just nestles into the screen for a 3-run homer. And if you watch films of that, Yaz is like this, and he just goes, oh. I mean, he literally just buckles. And then, of course, the rest is history. Bucky got a new middle name for Red Sox fans that day. I think it's Bleeping. I think they call him Bleeping. Yeah. Well, 1978 was certainly Jim Rice's year. Jim Rice emerged as probably one of the most fearsome hitters in the league. And this just kind of sums it up. He had 213 hits, 15 triples. That's a heck of a lot of triples in a season. And he had 15 triples that year. Hit 46 homers, 139 RBIs. His slugging percentage was .600. The OPS is when you add the on-base percentage and the slugging percentage together. When you start getting numbers up in the 900s and thousands and stuff, that's an outstanding year. And this is interesting right here. 406 total bases. He was the first American leaguer since Joe DiMaggio did it in 1937, and no American League player has accumulated over 400 total bases since then. That's pretty impressive. He led the American League in total bases in 77, 78, 79, and the only other American League player to do it 3 years in a row, some guy named Ty Cobb, back in 1907, 1908, and 1909. So Jim Rice is a pretty elite company. And actually, ultimately, I think what actually put him over the top for the Hall of Fame voters was the fact that that was at the end of all the steroid era. And when people started to see what these guys were doing, knowing they were juiced, and the writers started looking at it, they saying, and Rice all of a sudden, he was, his numbers started, they started looking at him a little differently. And then came 1979. They weren't in the race, but Yaz was doing different kinds of things because the hunt was on. His 400th career home run was coming up. And on September 12th, that's him taking the swing that ends up a ground ball single into right field for his 3,000th career hit. I was on a Yaz watch that year. They came into the weekend, I believe that was a Wednesday night, September 12th was. And they came into the weekend and Yaz needed 5 hits. And they were playing the Orioles Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, and then the Yankees were coming in. And I said, I'm not going to go Friday night. He's got to go 5 for 5. I said, that's not going to happen. And then I said, you know what? If you don't go, he's going to go 5 for 5. So I went, and he didn't go 5 for 5, but he did go 3 for 4. So I'm thinking, okay, this is pretty cool. So now he's got 2 to go. So Saturday comes around, he goes in, nothing. He gets 1 on Sunday, so now he needs 1. And then it was Monday, and then it was Tuesday, and he said it was the longest. And then it was the 8th inning, I believe, that he singled. So it was his last at bat. He singles off of Jim Beatty, and who picks up the ball in right field? Reggie Jackson. Everything stops in the field. They have a big celebration, a big ceremony, and Reggie just ran right in, broke through the crowd, and just handed him the ball and gave him a big hug. He became only the 4th Major League player to acquire 400 home runs and 3,000 hits, and the only other American League player to do it is Cal Ripken. That's a stat that, the American League and National League are almost kind of, they don't even pay much attention to that stuff anymore because you just have all the interleague play and all that kind of thing. And while I'm on that, how do you guys feel about interleague play? Do you like it or no? Yay or nay? No? Interleague play, do you think it's?
Yeah, I like it.
Do you? Yeah. I have a problem with it. I like it when they're playing each other and they never faced each other throughout the year and all that kind of stuff. But anyway, that's because I'm an old school.
Well, you're playing good teams, and you're not.
Well, that's the other thing. It is.
Bad teams.
Yeah, the balanced schedule. You play all these teams so many times, but you never know. Yeah, it does. It is definitely. Anyway, so that's 1979, and then 1982, 83 rather. One guy arrives and one guy goes. Wade Boggs arrived, and man, oh man, what a hitter he turned out to be. He played in 9 seasons. He led the Red Sox in hitting for 9 seasons. Nobody's ever done that before. That's a team record. 240 hits in 85 was a team record that he still holds. He had over 200 hits 6 consecutive seasons, won 5 batting titles. And his lifetime batting average in a Red Sox uniform, there's only one player who has a higher one, and I bet you know who it is. Williams. Ted hit 344. Boggs' batting average with the Red Sox was 338. So he arrives in 83, and also in 1983 at the end of the year, Yaz says goodbye. And probably one of the most emotional outpourings that Fenway Park had ever seen up to that time, and it's still at the top, and it was really a remarkable thing. I was a t-shirt vendor outside of Fenway Park at that time, and I printed up 775 Collier Yastrzemski t-shirts, and they went like that. I wish I had 1,000 of them. I wish I had 1,000,000 of them. It was unbelievable. I never saw anything like it. And the best part about it was at the end of that last game, I walked around the park and I went down Yorkie Way, and there was a line of people all the way out on the street. And Yaz was sitting down as you kind of go in there, that gate, and you go down below. He was sitting down there in a folding chair. He had on his baseball pants, he had on his flip-flops, and he had on the 3/4 baseball shirt. And he sat there and he signed autographs to every single person, waited till that line ended on that last day. It was a pretty cool thing. And that is him out there with his kids, with his family. His daughter bought $250 worth of stuff from me, and I was trying to give it to her, and she wouldn't let me. It was kind of it was a pretty neat day. Anyway, what's that? Yeah, that's me. Yeah, right. This is Yaz's dad, and that's Mrs. Yorkie. This is, I think, his son Mike is right here, and that's his brother. But yeah, that was quite a day. That was quite a day. I was a big fan of Yaz. I was Yaz, and you know why I liked him? Because my dad told him he's got to take Ted Williams' place. So I said, okay, that's something to root for. He hasn't got an easy thing coming up. Retired numbers. Again, Fenway becoming a museum, okay? When Ted Williams retired in 1960, his number retired with him. Only they never did anything about it. They just never gave it to anybody else. But if you look at, nobody was ever issued the number 9 after Ted. So in 1984, they decided that they would start displaying the numbers. And they did it, if you remember the Jimmy Fund nights, the Braves used to come in and they'd have a game and they'd play each other, an exhibition game. And this was in May of 1984, Jimmy Fund night. And Joe Cronin was sitting up in the booth, very, very ill. Actually, he would pass away just weeks after this. And Ted was down in the field, and Ted spoke. And then they unveiled the numbers and the right field facade. We began the tradition of the facade in right field. It's gone through a number of changes throughout the years, and I'll get to that as we move on. So that was 1984. 1986, one guy comes and one guy goes. The guy on the left, I'm sure you recognize, the Rocket, absolutely exploded in 1986. 4-4, wins the Cy Young Award, wins the American League MVP, and we're on our way to the World Series again. And really, the disaster of all disasters is awaiting us, only we don't know it yet. I put a photograph of Bob Stanley here. This is him with the birthday cake. And I did it because Bob Stanley is actually one of the more interesting characters in the history of the Red Sox. Only played with the Red Sox. He holds the Red Sox record for most appearances by a pitcher in a Red Sox uniform. But what's interesting about Bob Stanley is when you think about 1978 and Bucky Dent, okay, we think about Bucky Dent. Okay, we think about Mike Torres was the losing pitcher. He gave up the home run, and we think about Bucky Dent. When you think about 1986, right, you think about who? Billy Buckner, the ball dribbling through his legs, okay? Interesting thing. In the 1978 game, it was 3-2. The home run made it 3-2. The Yankees were ahead. Bob Stanley came in relief in that game, and he faced Mickey Rivers with Thurman Munson on second base. and it was a 3-2 game. And he gave up a double to Mickey Rivers, and Munson scored to make it a 4-2 game. To get out of that inning, the following inning, Bob Stanley gave up a home run to Reggie Jackson that was an absolute bomb that went into the center field bleachers to make it 5-2. The Red Sox scored 2 runs and lost that game 5-4 when Jim Rice put Lou Pinella's shoulder blades against the ball in right field, which would have been a 2-run homer in the 8th inning, but it ended the inning. So it's interesting that he gave up those runs that stretched it to 5-2, and the Sox got 2 of them back. I say Stanley's off the hook for a lot of things, and Bob Stanley also was the guy that came in and threw the wild pitch that set up the Bill Buckner play at first base. So he played a key sort of like GOAT kind of role in 2 huge, huge things, and he's off the hook. So anyway, that's him leaving the last game of his career with a birthday cake that the fans had given him. 1988, Bobby Doerr's #1 joins the facade after he gets elected into the Hall of Fame. And this kind of sets the criteria for the guys whose numbers are going to go up on the facade. There is a legend and a story that says Ted Williams was on the Veterans Committee. They were meeting in Tampa, and Ted Williams is alleged to have walked into the meeting of the Veterans Committee and in his rather booming voice, and he could be a little salty at times, made it known that if they didn't put Bobby Doerr in the Hall of Fame, he was resigning from this goddamn committee. And that was it. I don't know if that story is true. It's a legendary story, but whatever the case was, Bobby Doerr was in the Hall of Fame the following year. They used to refer to him as the unofficial captain of the 46 team, and he also was the first base coach on the 1967 team as well. But that's his number going up on the board, and of course this is Ken Coleman. This little guy is my son Josh, and I put that in there just because I like the photo, but there's going to be more to his story in a little bit and how it relates to the Red Sox. This is his first game. He's 4 years old in 1988, and behind him, standing in the batter's box, blurred, is Bo Jackson, who was playing for the Kansas City Royals at the time. Okay, 1989, Yaz's number joined the facade. And now the criteria is that in order to have your number, you had to retire with the Red Sox, played your entire career with the Red Sox, and then got into the Hall of Fame. That was the criteria. So now we have the numbers 9418 that are now on the board up there. Ted Williams, Joe Cronin, and Bobby Doerr, and now Kyle Yastrzemski. I take it back. Not retired from the Red. They had to retire from the Red Sox. Not have played your whole career with it, but retired from the Red Sox. And those 4 guys reached that criteria. I don't know if you remember, Fisk left us. And the reason he left us was because the Red Sox screwed up mailing his contract. Hayward Sullivan mailed his contract out late, declaring him a free agent. I'm a little bit embarrassed to tell you this, but I actually wrote him a 5-page handwritten letter and sent it to his house in New Hampshire, telling him, please don't leave the Red Sox. He obviously didn't listen to me. I didn't touch his heart as much as I wanted to. But there's, I guess there was another couple of $1 million involved, so I really can't blame the guy. But anyway, and what had happened was, this is just kind of gives us a little bit of a rundown of his career. His Hall of Fame number retired in the year 2000. I like this. I took this photograph, and I just liked it because it's that 9418 you see in the facade there. That was that way for a long time, from the time Yaz got up in 1989 until 2000. So for 11 years, the only thing we had up there was 9418, and then Fisk joined. Well, Fisk going up on the facade led to an alteration of what the criteria was. Because now the criteria was, well, Fisk he didn't finish his career with us. Because he actually ended up playing more games in Chicago than he did in Boston. He actually has a bronze statue outside of Comiskey Park. Okay? But anyway, so what they did was they hired him as a special assistant to the general manager's washroom or whatever it was, but they, basically, they just hired him in, and so that's how they got around that. So now we go to the 1980s, the 1990s rather. and a couple of guys we kind of remember. Mo Vaughn on the left-hand side had absolutely phenomenal numbers for 3 years. Was the MVP in 1993, and they called him the hit dog, and he was fun to watch. He used to hit the ball a long way. Ended up leaving, free agent, went to the Angels. Actually, his first year with the Angels, went down in the first base dugout catching a fly ball and absolutely smashed his knee to pieces. Very large man, and he really never came back from that. Hung around a little bit with the Mets, and then he was out of baseball. The guy on the right, still one of the most popular Red Sox players ever, and we all know the role he played. And in 2004, at the trading deadline, he left them. He traded him away. But really, without question, one of the best right-handed hitters that the Red Sox ever had. He holds the record for the highest batting average by a right-handed hitter in a season for the Red Sox when he hit 372. 1997, guy named Dan Duquette made one of the best trades ever. He traded a guy named Heathcliff Slocum, relief pitcher, to the Seattle Mariners for 2 kids. One of them was named Jason Varitek, and the other guy was named Derek Lowe. Well, we all know the role that Varitek played in this team. Some say he'll someday be the manager of this team. But the other guy didn't do bad either, and in 2004, Derek Lowe did something that no other pitcher has done in the history of baseball, and up until that time, and nobody's done it since. And in 2004, Derek Lowe was the winning pitcher in the Division Championship Series. He was the winning pitcher in the American League Championship Series, and he was the winning pitcher in the clinching game of all 3 of those in the 7th game of the World Series. And he also had 40 saves for them and won 20 games in a year. So this guy had a pretty good career with and did some pretty incredible things. He followed that up with the greatest trade in Red Sox history. And that was when he got some guy named Pedro Martinez from Montreal Expos for Carl Pavano and Tony Armas Jr. And that's it. And we got this guy. And as you know, all you have to say about that is the rest is history. Now we're moving towards the end of the millennium is on the board. 1999 All-Star Game is Fenway Park. They decided they're going to close out the millennium, the century and the millennium at Fenway Park. And probably one of the greatest moments in the history of baseball took place the night of the All-Star Game. Ted Williams was virtually blind at this time. It was his last time he was in Boston. They had the all-century team out there. Pete Rose was back because he had made the team. Major League Baseball brought him back for the first time to something official. They gave him special permission to participate in this. And you had probably the greatest gathering and collection of baseball players that actually spanned all the way back into the 30s. And we all remember watching that. If you haven't seen it, Google it. It's worth watching. Yeah.
A bit of trivia here.
Yeah.
The guy that drives the car,
Al Forrester. Yeah.
very good.
Great guy.
Wasn't he a great?
Great guy. Great guy.
Was.
Yeah. Yeah. He was, and I'll talk about him again in a minute, because yeah, he was a super guy.
Yeah.
He was a super guy. But this is a great photo. The story that goes with this is Ted was looking for all these guys, just mobbed them. And as you can see, I mean, I just love this. I mean, the guys that we had, not only all the all-star players that were there, but I mean, the old guys, you know, they were all coming over just to shake Ted's hand. And when he ever pulls out of the bullpen and you get the guy going through all of it, and then he just says, the greatest hitter who ever lived, and the place goes, I get goosebumps now just thinking about it. But anyway, as they were all clearing off the field, and the guy, the voice of the Sox at the park is going, please clear the field, please clear the field, we got to start the game, we got to start the game. He's going on and on. And Williams, who couldn't see anything, this is Bob Feller, by the way, and Al says to him, and he goes, where's my guy? And he kept saying, where's my guy, where's my guy? And his guy was Nomar. Ted loved Nomar. And that's him. He finally found him, and Forrester said, you know, told him, he said he's right here. But these guys were coming up shaking his hand, and he didn't know who they were. And Forrester was whispering in his ear, it's Juan Marichal, it's this guy, it's that guy. And so it was pretty impressive. It was pretty impressive. And of course, in 2002, we lost them. And Fenway Park now turns into literally a chapel, if you will. And they had 2 ceremonies. This ceremony, they actually asked donations, and all the money went to the Jimmy Fund, which of course was Ted's bailiwick anyway. That's what it was. They estimate that Ted Williams in the 1950s may have been responsible alone for raising $5 million for the Jimmy Fund. $5 million in 1950s dollars is an enormous amount of money. And he would always do these things. He was always backdooring hospitals. He was always doing all kinds of things, visiting hospitals, always, I don't want any press around. I don't want any cameras around. I don't want any press around. So here was this big, bombastic, cantankerous, foul-mouthed guy that basically, when it came to kids, and especially Jimmy Fund kids, it was a whole other situation. But what I did, I like this quote. President George Bush at the time said of Ted, he gave baseball some of his best seasons, and he gave his own best seasons to his country. And that's really, I mean, you know, five years he missed while he was fighting for his country. But also in 2002, we are now on the dawn of the rivalry with the Yankees taking just going to a whole other level. We all remember 2003. And this rivalry was back with a vengeance. Now, for the first time ever, the Red Sox would play the Yankees for the American League pennant, but it would be a 7-game series. And of course, the Red Sox were leading. Aaron, you know, this is hard for me to talk about, although it's not so hard anymore in 2004, but I will tell you a funny story about this. And this photograph here, this was in July. The Red Sox were about 10 games back, kind of floundering. It was a rainy day in July, and they weren't going to play the game. They were going to call the game off, and Veritek said, no, we want to play. We want to play. It was the field was soggy, it had been raining. And they said, no, we want to play. Well, what happened was this. A-Rod got plunked, he made his way to the mound. Veritek said, no, you're not going there. And then he shoved a little shoe leather in his face. The Red Sox were losing the game at the time. They battled back and ultimately won the game when Bill Miller, in the bottom of the 10th inning, hit a home run off Mariano Rivera. And that sort of turned it around. So anyway, this is Roger Clemens. This is Game 3 of the American League Championship Series, 2003, when they kind of went out a little bit. That kind of explains a little bit. That speaks for itself. Manny's got a bat, he's chasing Roger Clemens. I don't think they were going to have a beer, at least not then, at that point in time. And then, of course, in the seventh game, Aaron Boone hits the home run off Tim Wakefield in the 11th inning. My niece was visiting my house at the time. God love her. Doesn't know a baseball from a grapefruit, but she knows about the Red Sox, and she gets it, sort of. And she brings her fiance over to meet Uncle Ray. She was visiting in Florida. And I'm sitting there watching this game. Of course, I probably wasn't the greatest host. It was nice to meet the guy. I love him today. He's a great guy. Well, when Aaron Boone swung and hit the ball, I got up and left. I said, excuse me, because I knew it was a home run. I did not want to watch the thing. I didn't want to watch any of it. I knew it was over. I just got up and I went to my room. I said, excuse me, everybody. And I just left and I went to my room. My son still makes fun of me about this. He said, yeah, Mike and Jill were very impressed, Dad. It was a good job. But anyway, what ended up happening was I never saw that ball land in the stands until after they won the 2004 World Series. Then and only then, when they came on the TV, would I actually watch the end of that, because it all had been okay. Next up is 2004. I'm going to introduce you to a guy who's a big part of the Ted Williams story. And this guy's name is Frank Tallarico. This is him here. This is the Santa Claus look here. This is him at the Ted Williams Museum in Lecanto, Florida. And you know, it's funny because things happen in our lives and we just kind of follow our path of energy and things just happen and rotate around. Well, Frank Tallarico was a neighbor of mine in Venice, Florida. And I had known Frank at this time for about 10 years. Never had any idea what Frank did, didn't know anything about anything. He was just a nice old guy that I figured he was just one of the thousands of retired folks who had come to live in Venice, Florida. And one day he knocks on my door. And he says to me, he said, Ray, he said, I need you to help me. I said, sure, Frank. I was a little bit, I didn't quite get it. I didn't really know him all that well. I knew who he was. He knew who I was. And anyway, he says to me, he said, yeah, he said, I'm wondering if, he said, I know you're a big baseball fan. I know you're a big Red Sox fan. He said, I wonder if you can help me come to know Ted Williams. And I'm looking, I said, Frank, Ted's gone. You know, he's not here anymore. You know that, right? He said, yeah. He said, no. He said, I'm a sculptor. He said, and I've been commissioned to do a sculpture of a Ted Williams statue for the Ted Williams Museum. Well, at the time, the Ted Williams Museum is in Lecanto, Florida. It's in Citrus Hills, which is about a 2-hour drive from where we were. So it turns out that this guy right here, his name is Hank Avanish. And Frank and Hank are from Scranton, Pennsylvania. Well, Hank Avanish was a Marine during Korea, and his pilot instructor was a guy by the name of Ted Williams. Well, Hank went on to become very successful. He owned a chain of health clubs up in the Scranton area. And Hank and Frank had worked on a monument to the coal miners of Scranton in a museum up there. And so Hank called Frank. He said, I want you to do the Ted Williams statue. He got in touch with the Ted Williams Museum. He said, I want to pay for a statue for Ted. So I'm like, well, sure, Frank, I'll do whatever I can. So Frank spent about 4.5 hours with me that afternoon, and I go get all my Ted Williams books, and I'm telling him story after story about Ted Williams. I mentioned about the Jimmy Fund stuff. I said, I said, in the 1970s and 80s, I said, when people were collecting a lot of autographs through the mail, it became pretty well known that if you really wanted an authentic Ted Williams autograph to be mailed back to you, you included a check to the Jimmy Fund. And if you didn't include a check to the Jimmy Fund, you'd wait about 6 months and you'd probably get a stamped autograph. But if there was a check to the Jimmy Fund, you'd get it back within a couple, 3 weeks, and it would be signed and it would be authentic. So I went through all this, and like what I said earlier about the fact that he would sneak in a lot. So Frank, again, really doesn't know a hell of a lot about baseball at all, but he knows, you know, he knows, I mean, he's an artist. He's got the soul of an artist. So I would go over to his studio and whatnot, and I would just kind of check on him, and I learned a little bit about how they make statues, how they do sculptures, and they make these little maquettes, and they're all in clay, and the whole process. So I became a student. Well, about maybe 2 months into this thing, he calls me, and he says, I wonder if your son Josh will help me. Now this is the maquette. It's a little thing. It's about this big. It's all made of clay. Okay? And he said, I need a live model. He said, do you think, would Josh mind coming over and modeling for the statue? And I said, I don't think so, Frank, but I'll ask him. My son was 18 at the time. He had just finished playing, he just graduated from high school. He had played baseball at Venice High School. So he said, tell him to get a uniform that's too big for him. He said, because he's kind of lanky like Ted was, and I just need the folds of the uniform. So this is my son Josh in Frank's studio in Venice, Florida, which was adjacent to his home. And he went around him. And Frank gave me all the photographs. There's about 15 photographs, and he's got them all from every angle, behind him, in front of him. So anyway, so my son ends up posing for the Ted Williams statue. Well, the funny thing about this is now Frank's got me. He says, you're going to come with me. So now they're dedicating the statue in Lecanto. I go to the dedication at the Ted Williams Museum. Now this is initially where it was. And it really, if you've ever been to Citrus Hills, it truly is the middle of nowhere. But in the middle of nowhere is where Ted Williams lived, and they built this museum. So when they would have the inductions, all of baseball came. I mean, everybody came. But then when Ted passed away, nobody came. So that's why they ended up having to close it, and they moved it. And they ended up at they wanted to bring it to Boston somewhere, but they didn't really get anybody to come on board. So they ended up, the Tampa Bay Rays got in touch with the guy who was the director. He said, we'll do it. So they built it, and it really is cool. If you get to the Tropicana Field, it's worthwhile to go in a little early and see it. It really is a very, very nice museum. But anyway, So this is Frank and his lovely lady Dottie, and this is the statue, and this is outside the Ted Williams Museum in Citrus Hills. Well now, so I get to go out there with him, and I was writing a little bit for the local newspaper. I'd write sports columns every now and again. So I'm now covering it for the newspaper, so I get to talk to Rico and to Louie, and I'm just asking him about, Louie was inducted into the pictures part of the Ted Williams Museum that day as well. So then come to find out, Mayor Menino says, I want a statue to Ted in Boston. So that starts the whole process again. So now the Red Sox get in touch with the museum, and they say, what about that statue? So now they send down Janet Marie Smith and a guy named Paul Hanlon. Janet Marie Smith is the architect who basically did all the designing and the remodeling of Fenway Park. She was the architect who built Camden Yards. She's done work at Dodger Stadium with the Braves. Should be in the Hall of Fame, in my opinion, but that's another story for another day. But anyway, they send her down, and they also send Billy Klaus. Billy Klaus played for the Sox in the late 50s. He played about 5 or 6 years with Ted. He was living in Sarasota at the time. And they wanted him to go look at the statue. They wanted some sort of an okay on the likeness of Ted in the face and whatnot. So so now Frank says, I'm going to the Foundry. You want to come? And I'm like, I'm going wherever you're going, buddy. I'm in. You can pull me in a red wagon. I don't care. I'm coming. So this is at the Foundry in Sarasota. This is Billy Klaus and Frank. And now that day that Janet Marie was in there, and then obviously they said, okay, it's good to go. So now we're going the next year to Fenway Park there on April of 2004, and they're dedicating what they then called the Ted Williams Jimmy Fund statue. Because what Frank said was, Frank was very touched by the idea that Ted could be such a hard guy, and with all the stories of all his cantankerousness and his sort of acrimony with the press and some of the fans and all of that stuff, and yet when it came, and the fact that he would never tip his cap, but the fact would, he said he'd give his hat to a kid from the Jimmy Fund. And that was where Frank came up with the idea of making sure that this kid looked like, obviously he looks like a cancer patient, just a little kid with no hair on his head. And the best part is, so now I get to go to Boston with him. So we're running around and Frank's introducing me, this is my consultant. I said, Frank, don't consultants make a lot of money? I said, I don't know, but I thought consultants got paid a lot of money. I said, I haven't seen a dime yet. But anyway, I get to ride with Frank, and this was the best part. He is talking to this, I think this crew was from Rhode Island. And this was outside, it was in the morning of a Friday. They dedicated the statue, and all of a sudden I find myself standing next to Mayor Menino and Bobby Dorr and Pesky and stupid me with my camera. And I'm just taking pictures. But, so this is Frank, and he said basically, he absolutely said this. The curse is over, Ted's going to chase it away. The Red Sox beat the Yankees that night, and I'm laughing like heck because really, Frank doesn't know a baseball from a grapefruit. He knows nothing about baseball. But it was just, it was so funny and so appropriate that Frank actually declared the curse over in April of 2004. Not many people know that, but now you people do. Yeah. Okay, and then of course, 2004 speaks for itself. The big things that year, obviously Theo Epstein, I still can't believe he was 32, but this guy also should get a fast ticket to the Hall of Fame, without question. Both the Red Sox and the Cubs, are you kidding me? I mean, he was sent by the baseball gods. I mean, there's no doubt about that. And then, of course, he gets Kurt Schilling in the trade at Thanksgiving time. And Kurt's famous saying, nothing I can think would be more fun than making 50,000 Yankee fans shut up. And then Game 4 of the American League Championship season, down 3-0, got hammered. Funny story, my brother didn't go to the game. He said to me, he asked me, called my daughter and said, do you want the tickets? I cannot go there and watch the Yankees celebrate. I can't do it. I can't handle it. I'll have a heart attack. I'll die. So he didn't go. And of course, we know the story. Dave Roberts played 45 games with the Red Sox. 45 games with the Red Sox. That guy still can't buy a meal anywhere in the city. Okay, so they come down. It's the 9th inning. And Mariano Rivera's on the hill. Kevin Millar walks to lead off the inning. Roberts comes off the base, out to run from him, and everybody in the world knows that he's going to steal a base. Everybody. And he doesn't even wait. He goes in the first pitch, bang, bang, play, gets singled in, and then it all begins. Ortiz hits the homer. Ortiz hits the single the next night. And I will say this, Kevin Millar, the night of that fourth game, was saying to anybody that would listen to him, hey, we're not out of this yet. Don't let and he was saying, banging in his glove, and he's talking to Mike Timlin, don't let the Sox win tonight. He said, don't let the Sox win tonight. We win tonight, he said, then, we get tomorrow, and then we go to New York, we get Pedro, we get Schilling game 6, and then anything can happen in one game. So he literally was that positive. And then they end up winning, and then they end up winning, and then they end up winning, and then, of course, they end up winning. I mean, it truly was I remember sitting in my dad was born in 1921 and died in 1998. So he never saw them win the World Series. And I remember, and the night of that game, my son was away at college, and whatever it was, 12:30 at night, when Edgar Renteria grounded the ball back to Keith Folk, who flipped it to Minkiewicz. I took my dad's ashes out of his sacred place in my house, and I put them on my lap, and I had my son on the phone. So I had to connect. I had to make the three generation connected. It was pretty cool. Okay, and this is this was unbelievable. David Ortiz. I really like this. If you look closely at this photograph, this is them raising the 2004 championship banner. But if you look right here, this is Dorr and Pesky, right here, and you see them kind of arm in arm. And one of the greatest things, one of the greatest photos that I saw through all of that was Kurt Schilling literally picking up Johnny, and Pesky's just got tears coming down his. I mean, it's just great, great, great stuff. And David Ortiz. There's more on him later, but the offensive, the clutch play of him with a bat in his hand is truly remarkable. So now we go to 2005, and another trade gets made. They get Josh Beckett, and they get this guy, Mike Lowell. And Mike Lowell was a throw-in. If you want Beckett, and they gave up, anybody remember who they gave up in the trade? Hanley Ramirez. They traded Hanley Ramirez, who was a kid then, very, very highly touted prospect, and they got Beckett, and you got to take Lowell, because they thought Lowell was in the scrap heap. He was too old, he was done, he was finished, and all that. And I really like this photo. This was taken by a fan, because what you have here is Manny Ramirez, 2004 World Series MVP, Mike Lowell, 2007 World Series MVP, and David Ortiz, the 2013 World Series MVP. I dare say you may not find another photograph of the three of them actually in action on the field at the same time, but that's pretty cool. And this was taken during the American League Championship Series in 2007. And then this one I really like. This was just an old favorite. I just like this a lot. This young lady was obviously a Red Sox fan. Anybody's going to get a tattoo that big? But she said, and I found the photograph online, and I asked her about using it. I said, obviously you got to tell me a story. Nobody gets it. There's no tattoo that doesn't have a story attached to it. And she said this was like her high school and college friends that just really got big into the Red Sox. And she said it just reminded her of a time. So that's the two that. I should ask her if she's got a 13 marked on there somewhere, if she went back and had it updated or not. But anyway, that particular 2007, they were down 3-1 against Cleveland. And that 2007 American League Championship Series, a lot of time again. And then they came back and outscored them 30-5 in the next 3 games. All started by a Grand Slam home run by J.D. Drew, who, even though he wasn't quite as good as everybody thought he should have been, I'll love him forever for that. Beckett was 2-0 in the American League Championship Series, won the MVP. They swept the Rockies. Lowell was the winner. And this is kind of what happened during the postseason. Schilling and Beckett were undefeated in the postseason. And some guy named Lester, who wasn't bad. So the following year, they hit the 3 million attendance and then did it for 5 straight years. And Terry Francona, He was 8-0 as a manager in the World Series. That's pretty good. Then came 2008. Dustin Pedroia was the American League Rookie of the Year. He was a Silver Slugger Award winner. He was an MVP. This is him receiving his Silver Slugging Award early for 2007, early in the season in April. And that guy over there is David Price. The reason I have Price over there in 2008 is because I was at this Game 7 of the American League Championship Series, and of all places, Tropicana Field. It was David Price who beat the Sox that day. It's the only postseason win he has. He came out of the bullpen, and he beat the Red Sox. Pedroia hit a home run in the first inning, and that's the only run the Sox would get. They ended up losing that game. I don't remember if it was 2-1 or if it was 3-1, but it didn't matter. It could have been 100-1. They lost going back to the World Series for back-to-back years. And then it was time to add some more numbers. And this is particularly interesting to me. This is Johnny Pesky's hand. I mentioned to you earlier about my friend who was taking the photograph the night of his retirement. She took this photograph from right above the 14, obviously, looking down at the fans. She took that photograph maybe about 20 minutes after the thing had been unveiled, and she got this one. This was in 2009. Pesky's number had been retired, and they broke protocol again for Pesky, because Pesky's not in the Hall of Fame, but Pesky is Pesky. Pesky worked 63 years for the Red Sox. Nobody minded that Pesky's number ultimately went up there. The way they were now doing it is the previous number with the guy who would unveil the number. So Fisk unveiled Pesky's number 6, and now Pesky was going to unveil Rice's number 14. So she just looked down, and she had her zoom lens, and she zoomed in and just took a picture. This is Pesky's hand with his 2007 World Championship ring. And then a few minutes later, he pulled it off. This is her and me at the 100th birthday game. She took all the pictures at the 100th birthday game that I put in the book. It truly was remarkable. Was there anybody there? It was unbelievable. They played the music from the Field of Dreams when the guys were coming out of the cornfield, and that's all they did. And then these guys started appearing from there. There were 212 of them, and they would come out of the center field bleachers area. Rice was the first one out. He came out from left field, came out from the left field door, and these guys just started appearing. They came out of the dugouts, and they would just flash the names up on the screen, and they were just playing the music. They didn't announce anybody, and everybody and they all ended up, as you can see, they all ended up in the middle of the diamond. The Red Sox lost that game to the Yankees. The last two guys out, okay, this is Johnny Pesky and Bobby Doerr. Obviously Ortiz wearing the 1912 Red Sox uniform, looking like an ice cream man. That was the 1912 home uniform. And Wakefield and Veritek had just retired the year before. So they came out, and then Yastrzemski was the last one out. Bobby Doerr was 93, Pesky was 92. Pesky passed away before the end of the baseball season that year. Bobby Doerr just passed away at the beginning of the last season, but just about a little under a year ago. Wakefield has 186 wins. Only Cy Young and Roger Clemens have more wins in a Red Sox uniform. And Big Papi is Big Papi. He needs nothing. This gentleman is the sculptor of the Ted Williams, of the teammate statue, and also of the Yaz statue. Antonio Tobias Mendez is his name. He did, they asked him to, kind of interesting, he did a lot of sculptures. He's done a lot of them down in the Orioles Park. He's from Baltimore. It was found by one of the Red Sox traveling secretaries, saw a sculpture that he did of Thurgood Marshall, which is in what is now the Thurgood Marshall Airport in Baltimore, and saw the sculptor, really liked it a lot, got in touch with him, and then invited him to submit his idea. They wanted, if you saw the book, The Teammates, it's taken, there's a photograph on the cover where they're all kneeling, the four of them are kneeling with the bats, and that's kind of what they wanted the sculptor to be, and he didn't like that idea. So he said he wanted, so he elevated them. They're not really looking, they're looking at the camera. And what he wanted to do was he wanted to encompass it. So if you notice, if you look at the teammate statue, kind of goes in a little semicircle, and they're all facing each other. And he thought that depicted teammates more. And for years, they were talking, they wanted one of him swinging a bat or running the field, and he said he went with his doffing his cap on the last day of the season because he thought that just spoke more about Yaz, the guy. So that's what the teammates was on June 9th, 2010. There's the book that I was talking about. Yeah, and that's, of course, this is Ted, Dorr, Dominic DiMaggio, and Pesky. And at the time, I think Dominic had just passed away. So there was just Johnny Pesky and then in 2013, September 22nd, Yaz's statue was dedicated. And this is just going into the playoffs. The season's coming to an end, and ultimately they would win that World Series. Now that season began, obviously, with the marathon bombing, where once again Fenway Park became a chapel again, essentially. David Ortiz is the only guy I know who could get away with dropping the F-bomb in church, but that's essentially what he did that day. And it was, you know, obviously Boston strong, and the whole country picked up on it, and the team picked up on it as well. And they brought the shirt with them that followed them around throughout the whole season, with the 617 on the back. These are just a couple of photographs that I kind of like. This is Gus Pallard. It's his first game ever at Fenway Park, and I looked at him and I said, "That's a lucky kid." Not many. I don't remember as a little kid getting to sit in a good seat like that. I was always out in the bleachers, saving up my hood wrappers. If you got 10 of them from whatever you had, they'd give you that day, and you'd go out there and they'd fill up the bleachers behind the bullpen. And I just liked this photograph. I just like the idea that this is reflected in the kids' glasses. It's just kind of a neat little... And then we go up to the end for Big Papi, where he's joined... when these guys came out of the field, it actually was pretty cool. When Yaz and Rice walked out together, Papi was standing there waiting for them to come out to him. There was a red carpet leading out to where he was. And Papi did one of these in deference to Rice and Yaz, which really was pretty cool, because he obviously gets it. So this was taken that night after his last game, where they had the big thank you banner out there. And now we're coming up on 2017, and two things happened this year. Now the criteria again went. All of these guys, okay, Pedro number was unveiled the week after he had gone to Cooperstown and having his number inducted. Then they finally reneged on Boggs, okay, which is kind of interesting. Boggs had gone years, and they wouldn't retire. Eight guys wore Boggs' number 26 before they retired. 7 guys wore Fisk's number 27 before they retired. So they kind of went the gamut with Boggsy, but now with Ortiz, he retired in 2016, and they announced on his last game that they would be retiring his number the following season. Now, I find that interesting because he's not in the Hall of Fame yet. He's got 5-year waiting period before he can be voted into the Hall of Fame. Personally, I kind of think it was. I think it might be related to the sort of the implication of him with the steroid thing back in 2004 in the Mitchell report, and I think the Red Sox were just getting out ahead of it. So that obviously what they're saying is we don't care if he doesn't get inducted in his first time in. I'm not sure that, I don't think that's going to affect him. I really don't. The way it's obviously affected Bonds and Roger Clemens and McGuire and Sosa and all those guys. But anyway, and then this here, as you can see, it's a white banner. And what they do with white banners are temporary banners. And what they do is, like when they win and they're heading into the next series, okay, this is the Eastern Division Championship banner. That will not remain outside the ballpark. All they have outside the ballpark are the red ones and the blue ones. The blue ones signify that they won the American League pennant. The red ones signify that they won the World Series. And this is how how far they've come in the last 20 years, really, because they don't, the white ones, they used to hang them there, but they don't. They're temporary, signifying the success of the team. This was taken, my friend went in, she went in and got a picture of the white one, because she knew that if they lost, it wouldn't be out there. So that's, that was taken between the series with the, who did they beat in 2017? The series that they won anyway before they lost to the Astros. So the 2007 Eastern Division champs. This is June 23rd, and you can see Poppy's number waiting to be pulled. That was a fun night. That was a fun night. There's several pictures of the book of the night that Poppy got his number retired. And then I'll leave you with this. This is the little girl that was on the front. This guy's great. This is his first trip to Fenway Park. It was in the summertime of 2017. It was in July. He's wearing Red Sox number 50, which is Mookie Betts. His mother's nickname was Mookie, so he's got so he's got the thing on, and he was a happy little fellow to be there at Fenway. So I thought that would be appropriate as we go on to yet. He's a fourth generation Red Sox fan, and he has no idea what he's in for, the poor fellow. It's really funny. It's almost like a religion. When you really think about it, none of us chose to be Red Sox fans, did we? We were indoctrinated, right? You were kind of brought, my dad said this is how it goes. That's left there, this is this. I go to Fenway, that's the pole, that's Pesky's pole up. He showed me the Morse code of the Yankees initials on the board, and then he went, and that's left field. That's where Ted Williams plays. And I just went, oh. I mean, it was like I was in church. So it is kind of an indoctrination. And of course, this is the foam finger, was really, really popular for a while. And I have a friend who went around, she would go to games and just hand it to people and take pictures of people with the foam finger. She got about 50 pictures of different people with the foam finger. And, you know, needless to say, you get a few beers in the guys and they all get into it. Addie Lou, hi guys. How are you? This is my troops. This is part of my troops, yeah. So anyway, obviously, Fenway Park, called the most beloved ballpark, okay? And it really, truly is amazing because today I really believe, and it hurts my heart to say this, but I believe baseball has kind of taken a back seat at Fenway because actually the experience of going to Fenway Park seems as important to people as the game was. And I remember back in the days, and I'm sure as I look out there, you folks do too, when you just had John Kiley on the organ. You know what I mean? There was not a whole lot of tra-la-la. You just went for the baseball game. I mean, that's what you cared about. And obviously, you know, as I tiptoe into the, I like to think I'm in the autumn of my life, although the argument could be made that the winter is fast approaching. But anyway, but it really is truly, truly amazing. And they've had 3 million people in there a number of times. They have not, I mean, it's like 2.7 million. And when you think back to 1967, when Tom Yawkey almost moved them in June, and he told them, if you don't build me a park, I'm taking the Red Sox out of here. And then those cardiac kids kind of turned it around, and he said, oh, never mind. And they've never been even close to under 1 million since that time. So I guess you could say that Fenway Park is the #1 park in America. Would you say that? Would you? Okay. Anyway. I can go, they're shining the lights on, I'm getting the flicker of the lights. I think that means they're trying to tell me something. I can take a hint. But anyway, any of the books, they're $20 if you want them. I'll be happy to sign for you. I certainly appreciate you coming out. Hopefully I'll be back. This place holds a very, very special place in my heart. I love coming here. So thanks. I appreciate you being here. And I love that show.